We're going to get started now with our presentation. I'm Kathy Newhook with the Harris Center. Today's Synergy session is called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Understanding Youth Outmigration. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The emergency exits are through the main doors and out through the atrium, or there's a lower exit as well down through the stairs in the atrium. Washrooms are, there's one washroom out through these main doors here. There are more washrooms down the hall and through the double glass doors. Turn off your cell phones or keep them on vibrate. We're going to take some pictures during the session. If that doesn't work for you, let us know and we'll make sure they don't go anywhere else. We're also webcasting today's session, so we have a handheld mic for audience members when they ask a question. Even though we're a small group and clearly we can hear each other without a mic, we ask you to still use the mic so people watching online can hear your question as well. So before we get started, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we are gathered as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit of Nitassinan, or the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuhivut, and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. As I mentioned, today's session is about youth outmigration, a topic that has been a focus of rural communities across the province for decades, if not longer. Today's presenter, it's my pleasure to introduce Ray Bollman. Ray spent most of his career as a public servant with Statistics Canada. He was the founding editor of Statistics Canada Rural and Small Town Canada Analysis Bulletins, with some 65 bulletins available at the Stats Canada website. He is also past chair of the OECD Working Party on Territorial Indicators, and he is now research affiliate with the Rural Development Institute at Brandon University and a professional associate of the Harris Center. So I'll pass it over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be here. I was in town for another event and I phoned Rob Greenwood for my annual rate of pay as a professional associate, which is 1 free cup of coffee. Then he offered me 2 cups of coffee if I would do a webinar. So now I'm in trouble, I think. So rural youth outmigration is the topic, and I do have an outline. The introduction is, I think everybody knows, rural youth outmigration remains a policy issue. And this is my credit about rural youth outmigration. This is the one-room school I was in rural Manitoba for 8 years, grades 1 to 8. But as Kathy said, I used to work at Statistics Canada, and all those guys would say, Bollman, there were 2 rooms there. What happened when I got ready to go to grade 9, which was in the other room, the a school bus came and took me away. So I spent 8 years in 1 room, and I call it my one-room school experience, but it's a school of 2 rooms. Shortly after that, after I left this one-room school, I was on a 4-H exchange trip. First time I was ever on an airplane, 7 airports later in a long drive. I was at Eastport, Newfoundland. So that was my first introduction to Newfoundland, and that happened to be a previous century when I was in the 4-H. So my interest in this topic has been triggered by a report by Karen Foster and Hannah May at Dalhousie on understanding rural youth migration. And Hannah did a nice think piece on I am not your return on investment. When talking about youth, do not forget about the youth. And Hannah, I think, is listening. If you have questions, type them to Hannah and she will type answers back. Sorry, Hannah, apparently they cannot take your voice. They'll just take your typed words. Or I'll give you Hannah's email and Karen's email. If you've got questions about this report, they're the best people to ask. But there are some good things to talk about in this report. First, obviously, rural youth retention is often the policy focus. We want to keep rural youth here. It seems to be the policy focus. And Heather and Karen argue youth outmigration is not the problem for policy intervention. That's not where you should intervene with policy, what they say in their report. So they have three key messages. One is that rural youth outmigration is more than an economic factor, an economic issue, but education and jobs come to the deal one way or another. Obviously, all youth are mobile. They leave almost all leave a parental home. All of them have to get older, so they go from school kids to high school kids to whatever to adults. So there's that mobility, and many leave their communities. So there's lots of different mobilities involved. And Karen and Hannah argue for context-specific policies. Key message number 2, rural youth outmigration is typically good for the individual. Most youth who leave get better off, but it's typically not good for the community. So the issue is a problem for communities, but not necessarily a problem for youth. And so the policy attention would be to provide supports to leave, that would be one group of policies, supports to stay, that would be another group of policies, and supports to be returned would be another group of policies. So you don't want one rural youth outmigration policy, perhaps 3. And on the youth who stay, many parents, teachers, authority figures say, people who stay around here are flunkies or failures. This is a failing place. Everybody who stays is failures. And that was implicit, if not explicit, where I grew up beside that school in Manitoba. And Karen and Hannah are arguing there is value in this place. Tell students there's value in this place. Celebrate the value of this place and provide support for students in this place. So background, I have done some some fact sheets for the Focus on Rural Ontario fact sheets published by the Rural Ontario Institute, and there's a bunch here on mobility. So understanding Ontario obviously doesn't help one understand Newfoundland, for which I apologize. The objective, I'm trying to quantify the size of each target clientele, the number of rural youth who leave, the number who stay, and the number who return. So those are my objectives of this presentation. The geographic grid is census divisions, and the analysts of Newfoundland will know these census divisions, and number 1 is the Avalon Peninsula, and so on. And I can put this map up later if you're not familiar with which census division your hometown is in. Why do rural youth leave, and why do they return? This is an old study, but I still think it's relevant. Here on the bottom is the percent of rural youth who identify a specific reason why youth and young adults would choose to leave a rural community. Number 1, jobs. Number 2, education. Number 3, fun. That's what rural youth say why they would leave a rural community. Here we have percent of rural youth identifying reasons why youth or young adults would choose to live in a rural community. Why would you choose to live in a rural community? Less crime, better security, safety, family, simpler lifestyle, slower pace, down-to-earth, quiet, close-knit, community atmosphere, good place to raise a family. Communities, family and communities are the reasons youth say they would want to live in a rural community. Jobs are way down here. Another question, percent of rural youth identifying specific things that could be done, maybe policies that could be done to attract more youth, young adults to rural communities. Well, yes, 30% identify create jobs, so jobs are important here. And fun. Make this a pleasant place, a fun place to live. So I was recently keeping up to date on rural youth outmigration literature, and here's the young dog saying, "Dad, I feel it's time I left the den." And the father says, "You've heard the call of the wild. if you follow the other coast, the young dog is half the time imagining going back to his roots as a wolf in the forest, and the other half carrying slippers, for the master and having a soft bed to live in. So the father's saying, you've heard the call of the wild, and look at the bright eyes of the father here. Actually, I was thinking more of getting a job as a barista in a trendy coffee shop. The father is a bit bewildered. In the evenings, I could enroll in dance lessons. On weekends, I could join a quilting club. More bewilderment. He's heard the call of the urban. That is the same type of bewilderment my father had when, I didn't want to go to the dance in that one-room school. I was in a high school 10 miles away, and the range of dance partners was much better, and those were the bewilderment he had in his eyes. So another piece of background context is the changing demographic pressure on the labor force. And this is a Canada chart. Back in the early 70s, for each 100 people that were entering the retirement age, 250 people were entering the age to come onto the workforce. By 2008, plus or minus, every time one person retired, say this line is 100, every time 100 people retired, there are 100 people coming onto the workforce. Now, out here, we're down to about 80 at the Canada level. Every time 10 people retire, there are only 8 people coming onto the workforce. A demographic labor shortage, unless the old folks like me keep working. And here in Newfoundland, here's the trend for Metro St. John's. 2008, and for non-metro outside the St. John's Census metropolitan area, maybe 2004, went into a below 100 position. So if you're outside of St. John's, there only might be 60 people old and coming to the workforce, getting to the age group, they're coming onto the workforce for every 100 retiring. So it's a dramatic difference, maybe traumatic, but dramatic difference compared to 20 years ago when every time 100 retired, 200 were coming onto the workforce. A major demographic change in the labor market. Population trend off the Avalon Peninsula and all the census divisions off the peninsula. Ahead, I want to go ahead. So the green is all census divisions, all other census divisions except the Avalon Peninsula. All these bars are green. Population decline 96 to 97, 97 to 98. The only time population increased was 2008, 2009, and 2009, 2010. The recession in the rest of the world caused boom of population in rural Newfoundland. I don't think that's a good policy recommendation for getting people to move to rural Newfoundland. The rest of the time, rural Newfoundland has had a population decline. These bars are being negative for all periods of the last 20, 30 years, except for 2. I looked at, for Newfoundland as a whole, the percent of youth in school, and if you're not in school, the percent employed. So 15 to 19 years of age, how many were students during the school months? About 85%. It bounces around due to a small sample size here in the labor force survey. And women are slightly higher than men, but about 85% are in schools. If you're not in school, if you're not a student, 15 to 19, so only talking about 15% of the kids, right? Because 85% are in the school, so the 15% are not in the school. About 50% are employed. So half are working, half are not working. If you're not in school, 15 to 19. So the half of 15% is 7.5%. So, most kids are either in school or working. This one. Oops, this one. Now, moving on to 20 to 24% of the population, 20 to 24 who were students, 40% for females, 35%, 30% for males. So the older group, 20 to 24, 30 to 40% are in school or university or post-secondary, and therefore 60% are not in school. If you're not in school, or in recent periods, about 70% are employed for non-students. So most of them are working. If it was up to 80%, you'd be getting the average of that would be an excellent, 80% would be excellent because very few age groups, 80% are working. So 15 to 19, 85% are in school. If not in school, half have a job. 20 to 24, 30 to 40% are in school, so 60 to 70% not in school, and 70% of those have a job. So that's contextual background for Newfoundland as a whole. So finally, youth mobility. Let's get some real data here. So once again, deferring to the literature on the value of information, the value of knowledge. This, as you know, is Hobbes. This is Kelvin and his friendly tiger, Hobbes. Kelvin says, it's true, Hobbes, ignorance is bliss. So maybe the lack of information is bliss. Once you know things, you start seeing problems everywhere. And once you see problems, you feel like you ought to try to fix them. And fixing problems always seems to require personal change. And change means doing things that aren't fun. I say phooey to that. So here they're heading down the hill. But if you are willfully stupid, you do not know any better, so you can do whatever you like. The secret to happiness is short-term, stupid self-interest. And the good news is there's not an elected official in the world who thinks this, so we're safe, all is good. Everybody's following the evidence and making decisions on evidence, so life is good. We're heading for that cliff. I do not want to know about it. I do not want any information, any evidence at all. I'm not sure I could stand so much bliss. Remember, ignorance was bliss at the beginning. Now they're enjoying their bliss. Careful, we do not want to learn anything from this. So it's one example of the value of evidence-based analysis. How much knowledge do you want? How much evidence do you want? Do you have too much? Not enough? Is it on time? Is it too late? Or do you need to get on with the job? Because there's an expression saying government, paralysis by analysis. You just keep analyzing and analyzing and analyzing and never get on to a final answer to actually make a decision. So at some point you have to make a decision. And sometimes you get too much information. So there's quite an interesting balance here. So youth mobility. This is at the Canada level. I'm looking at individuals 18 to 24. In 2015 to 2016, there are 48,000 in-migrants, so it's going up. This is the number of people who moved into a non-metro census division. Any census division in Canada outside of places of 100,000 or more. 100,000 or more would be a metro type of census division. This is a non-metro census division. So I'm arguing, I think this would be the demand for the support to return or to in-migrate. This would be the focus, 48,000 people every year, annually, that move into a non-metro census division. If you had a policy target clientele, one of those words, to support youth of that age group moving in, there'd be 48,000 at the Canada level. And 61,000 out-migrants. So these are the people who are leaving. Karen and Hannah would argue they need support to leave, to make a better life for themselves. And obviously, if you learn the right things, they'll be very welcome back to the community to come back. So this is about 6% leave every year. Sorry, coming in, positive. 6% return or move in every year. 8% move out every year. So every year there's about a 2% loss. So 6% in, 8% out, 14% move every year, 86% do not move in any year. So there is the look at the demand for support to stay. Now look at the Newfoundland, look at the census divisions outside the Avalon Peninsula. Here we see, this is 4.6% on average over the last 5 years moved in. over the last 5 years, this average is 9.6% moved out. And you can see, consistent with the rest of Canada, the rate of out mobility has slowed down. Back here was 16% moving out. Now we're less than 8% moving out. That's due to many things, including the fact that this demographic pressure I was talking about, there are a lot more people retiring than coming onto the workforce, so there's relatively more jobs for the people who want to stay. 4.6 in, 9.2 out, so that's 4.6% every year leave on a net basis, or a decline every year, net 4.6%. So once again, this 4.6 plus this 9.2 is 13.8, so about 14% turnover every year. Therefore, about 86% stay in a non-metro census division every year in this age group outside the Avalon Peninsula. And the numbers, this is about 8.5K if I remember. This is about 17,000, I think, and again about 8.5 net loss. So the target clientele, if you will, for people moving in is 8,500 outside the Avalon. People moving out is about 17,000 outside the Avalon, and the net loss is about 8,500. So that I'm on 850, not 8,000. 0.85K. So these are the parameters, if you will. This is just looking at net migrants, so those coming in, those going out on the net basis. All across these census divisions, this was minus 4.6%. But some places lost a very low number on a net basis. Labrador minus 1.8, but that's the province of 4.6. And some places large rates of also small rates of out-migration, the Humber District, Corner Brook, Central District, Grand Falls, Windsor. But again, at the other end, wide variation. On the South Coast, 8.9% net loss every year of young individuals, 18 to 24. And 8.6, 8.7 in Notre Dame area and the Northern Peninsula. So there's a wide range in these numbers just within Newfoundland. And as you might expect, the range is even wider in rural Canada as a whole. Stikine in northeast BC is very high. Guysborough County in Nova Scotia. If you go across the Kansas Bridge and turn left and go east, that's Guysborough. And Victoria County up in the Cabot Trail and Nova Scotia. Those are three top places for out-migration in rural Canada. And an in-migration, maybe is not surprising, it's Fort McMurray and Banff to go skiing or working in the ski places, and Whistler to go working in the ski places and to also do skiing. So back to here we are. Now this is the in-migrants. How many people are moving in? How well are you, how good are you, how well are you doing at attracting young people to your place? Well, of all of these different census divisions, the biggest, highest rate of attraction was in the central CD, Grand Falls, Windsor area. 6.8% of the young people moved in every year, or moved in last year. But in this age group, Grand Falls, Windsor is the most attractive, all these. And under 18 kids, or parents of kids, is the most attractive, is the biggest number here. And this group, 25 to 24, the central CD is the most attractive. And in fact, each of these age groups, oh, here's another one that's tied, Notre Dame. And here, so all across, in terms of attractiveness, your ability to have people move into your census division, the central census division, Grand Falls, Windsor area, ranks the top on average over the last 5 years. Here is percent out migrants. So in the Notre Dame area, every year 12.5% leave of 18 to 24. And so the biggest loss in all age groups, it was Labrador, minus 4.5, and Nunatsiavut, 4. Yeah, this is the biggest loss, biggest negative number. Under 18, I learned how to say it, Nunatsiavut. Nunatsiut, there we are, minus 4.9. Northern Peninsula, Labrador, and Labrador. So Notre Dame, Northern Peninsula, Labrador are the northern areas have the greatest gross outflow regardless of the age. And I just wanted to look at outside of Labrador, Nunatsiut, there's a positive rate of net inflow in the 45 to 64 year group. More people move in than move out for each of these 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 census divisions in that age group, 45 to 64. Some are early retirees, or I'm not sure that's all of them, but each of those places are able to attract more people 45 to 64 than leave. And just making the point that Grand Falls, Windsor has the highest percent here and the highest percent here, and it's positive all the way across. That's positive, and that's positive. There's no other place, well, except for St. John's, there's no other place where there's a positive net attraction in each of these age groups. Sometimes there's a positive one, but then it's negative and negative. This is positive, youth are leaving, these are positive. So there's something there that the question period can inform me what the answer is. I'll ask the questions, you guys can provide the answers. So I think I'm out by a decimal point here. 4.6% in Newfoundland move in every year. That's the demand for support to return. 9.2% to move out every year, the demand for support to leave. 4.6, 9.2, that's 13.8. So about 14% turnover. 1 in 7 move. You meet somebody on the main street of these census divisions of that age. 1 in 7 have just arrived or just left, and 6 out of 7 were here last year. So 6 out of 7 stay. So, wrapping it up, talked about rural youth outmigration being a policy issue. Youth outmigration is not the problem for policy. Rather, Karen and Hannah are arguing for supports to leave, supports to stay, and supports to return, I think. I was looking to quantify the rural youth who leave, who stay, who return. We were looking at it by census division. So rural youth leave for jobs, schooling, and fun, return for family and community. And I guess since this is a study that's a bit old, the one thing that's not in there, because broadband was not a word invented, I think, back 15 years ago. So broadband also is a big issue for getting youth to move to any place. Changing demographic pressure on the labor force. Since the last about 10 years, more people are retiring than getting old enough to work. Total population on the Avalon Peninsula has only increased twice, off the Avalon Peninsula has only increased twice since 1996. And these are the numbers in 85% in school, half have a job, not in 85% in school, 15% not in school, and half of them have a job. And 30 to 40% in school for 2024, 60, 70% not in school, and 70% have jobs. And on youth mobility, we're just talking about 4.6% move in, 9.2% move out, 14% turnover, 6 out of 7 stay. So I think it's time for discussion and questions, or sunset this thing. And just let me put up these key messages from Karen and Hannah, which may be a focus for the discussion, and or which solution do you prefer, or coffee, I guess. Kathy, we can have all options on the table. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ray. You can have a seat over here in the hot seat if you'd like. And we're going to take some questions from the audience. We also have people watching online, and they can email in their questions to harriscenter@mon.ca. John, you can flag us down when there are questions that come in online. Justin's got a mic that he can pass around, and I'm going to have a seat over here. You're still mic'd. Perfect.
I think I might.
Yeah. Anyone have any questions in the audience?
So I
thought you had great data, so thank you very much for laying that out. My question maybe is not data related, but that key message number 3 about the rural narrative of failures. So from a systemic point of view, from an action point of view, what would you suggest that local communities do to mitigate that sense of failure beyond the numbers that you've provided?
The quick answer is I should defer to you. I mean, some things that I think lots of kids in high school do not know the jobs that are available in town. You know, who is managing the hardware store? Does the third person have grade 10 or a Bachelor of Commerce? You know, who's actually working on the accounting office? How many years of accountancy do they have? Was it accounting? Did they learn it on the job? Did they learn the accounting at a community college? Is it a university degree in accounting? What is the skill mix in this community? There are jobs here that are not driving trucks. Truck driving is very valuable because that'll also be the hockey coach. So it's that positive feeling of the community. Everybody's life is valued. You don't look at somebody and say, if you didn't get out of here, you're a failure. And I don't know how to do that. So that's why I defer to you. But that's what Karen and Hannah were saying. The literature and their experiences too often, it's a failure. A long time ago, a woman who, Shirley Dove, who grew up in Corner Brook, was reading the literature and noted that, I think someplace in the US, every high school graduate had to stand up, I think, at the graduation and say what he or she was going to do. You know, I know school, if I don't know, 25 or 35 or 75, it's a small rural school. You know, 74 out of 75 said, I'm going away to do a course in this, and this is where I'm going to end up. Or maybe a basketball scholarship or whatever. I mean, they were leaving town, they had something to go. One person sheepishly stood up and said, I'm going to stay home and farm with my dad. That person probably had a more successful career than the other 74. You know, but he was sheepish to stand up and say that because he didn't feel like it was a valuable thing. And so I don't know how you do that, so I need to stop talking.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Darlene. Thanks for the presentation. It's just a quick question on clarification on the employment. Would that be full-time, part-time? Is there any analysis of whether youth, in particular, I was thinking about the up to age 24s, the ones who are out of school and employed, are they fully employed or possibly underemployed? So the part-time, full-time mix is what I was wondering about in the analysis. Thank you.
Quick answer is, I don't remember. If you look at youth as a whole, most people with a part-time job are students. So if you take the students out, which I did here, now how many are employed, I think the numbers can cough up how many are full-time, part-time, and I do not remember. However, you're sitting beside Diane Looker, who did some discussion on that a year or so ago, and I forget, Diane, what you wrote down in the sense of if you're not a student but young, the full-time, part-time split.
I don't know the number, but certainly if you're not in school, most of the jobs would be full-time. So I'm going to throw out a comment, and it's a comment Ray's heard before, but perhaps some other people haven't. Is one of the things that's missing from the supports to stay, supports to leave, supports to return, is initiatives to attract new people. Because the research I do looks at mobility of both rural and urban youth. And while lots of rural youth go to urban and know about urban from friends, family, television, movies, blah, 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 very few urban youth have rural destinations on their radar. They don't have no sweet clue what it's like to live there other than there's lots of cows. That's their image, which would not be so true perhaps in Newfoundland. There are some initiatives that places elsewhere, there was one in Australia where people came and stayed at a sheep farm for a week. and found it fascinating and didn't realize that there were opportunities, that the wide open spaces, the peace, the quiet, the beauty, they had no idea. They don't have a concept. And so I think one of the things that rural communities can do is have various initiatives that would bring urban youth to their communities and show them why you love it there so much, because most people who live there and stay there love it. They see the good. So how do you communicate that to urban youth, so when this demographic pressure hits and there aren't enough people to fill the jobs that are there, that they're actually a wider pool than just getting people to come home?
I think we've got another question coming in from online.
Yeah, it's actually from Hannah Main, who wrote in and said, a comment to add about the discourse of failure. One thing we recommend in our report is to, quote, start with schools and start early, end quote. Views about the community are formed throughout the whole life experience. Things like teachers giving examples of jobs available in the community or teaching skills that will be valuable for rural jobs may help people understand that they do have a future in their community. Thanks, Hannah.
Excellent. Another question over here.
So generally speaking, from the numbers you presented, most rural communities are shrinking across all those age classifications. And yet the infrastructure cost to maintain those communities, it'll shrink a little bit, but there's structured costs of roads and healthcare that are relatively stabilized. At what point does it just become unsustainable to support a rural community and to just close it or amalgamate it or reduce the services? Is there a breaking point?
I would defer that question to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, who organizes all the municipalities. And quick answer is I don't know. You're right. There's too many classrooms for the number of students, too many side roads, too many paved roads. Maybe they should all go back to gravel roads, or maybe I'm thinking other provinces, not Newfoundland. But there's that issue out there, and I do not know the answer. That school that I went to fell down due to lack of interest. It could have been maintained and used for something. It was too far from anywhere to be useful. So that capital was there, wasn't used, disappeared. My uncle from time to time, would want to go to the local hospital, and his two daughters, my cousins, would say, Dad, that's a drive-by hospital. You don't want to go there. But they're good doctors. Yes, but they don't have the right equipment. Drive by. So there's all these issues there. How do you keep the infrastructure of the people are there where there's fewer people? And so part of the rhetoric is, don't shut down my school because you shut down my community. Well, it's the envers, comme on dit en français. It's the inverse, which is the community shuts down and they can't support a school. So you want to grow the community to keep your school. And if I knew how to grow some of these rural communities, I wouldn't be sitting here. I would, be selling my knowledge. So excellent question. I'm not running for municipal affairs, and maybe you should.
Well, we have another question or comment online.
Yes, this one comes from Dr. Dennis, forgive me, Dennis, Mulcahy or Mulcahy. He's a professor in the Faculty of Education here at MUN. Are we educating young people to leave? Are we educating young people with reasons to stay?
I should let Hannah type in some answers to that question because she has a pretty specific view. I think, yes, many people would say that students are being educated to leave. I can think back anecdotally for a long time. A colleague of Diane's at Acadia many years ago wrote a book, Learning to Leave, and documented very well that people were being taught in schools for jobs out there, but not for jobs here. Well, what you need to know for jobs out there, you also need to know here, but the examples were jobs out there. So what are the skill needs here? So I don't have any evidence, just anecdotal views of the world. The answer would be yes. Now, how many school teachers know the different skill of jobs in the community? You know, if they've just been in the community for a year or two, they know who's in the curling club and or the hockey rink or wherever they mingle, but do they know everybody else in the community and the mix of skills? So teachers need to know the mix of skills, and that they have to go and find the mix of skills, and whether it's parents have to drive it, principals, schools, I don't know. Excellent question. And I assume the professor at Munn knows the answer to that, so I'd be interested. I think it's his view. Yeah.
One thing that I can sort of share personally, I'm from Grand Falls and live in St. John's, and I think you guys are hitting on the what's the cultural narrative in our communities. Yeah. That's that like non-formal type of education that's teaching these examples, these opportunities are elsewhere, and it's less of an innovation type approach to, okay, we're dealing with things, well, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And how are we going to do it? And how can we use what we have?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Another question?
I have a similar experience growing up in rural Newfoundland, and I was always it was assumed I was going to leave.
Yep.
And I think I was only exposed to things that caused me to leave. But I'm wondering, in your research and looking at the numbers across the country, are there pockets that are doing, like, aside from the ones that you mentioned in terms of Fort Mac and Banff and Whistler, are there pockets that are doing that, supports to leave, supports to stay, supports to return well?
Quicker answer is no, and I think my long answer, quicker answer is I do not know, and the long answer is I do not know. I haven't read studies on that, and I haven't gone specifically looking at the numbers. Is there a community with more young people and an increasing number of young people? Now, within commuting distance of a city, yes, you'll find lots of people. Gee, this is a very nice place to live. One spouse may have a job there. The kids are happy in school. They can roam the streets because all the parents will send the kids home at 6 o'clock and so on. But one spouse could commute to the city. So it's easy to find those places where that you can commute to the city. Now, I don't know if Windsor Grand Falls qualifies as a city that everybody wants to commute to. I haven't been there for a while. So long answer is I don't know.
What are the types of supports that you talk about? I don't know if this is more Hannah's research, but it's the types. What supports do we mean when we say supports to leave and supports to stay?
Yeah, quick answer is, again, I don't know, and Hannah's in a better position to type this in. But supports to leave, including telling the young people, yes, it's good that you go. It's not bad that you're leaving our community. It's good that you go and get life skills, education, jobs, find mates, whatever it is young people want to do these days. But there are opportunities back here. So the part of return supports to leave is also saying you're welcome back here. And someplace in the literature there are communities with the newsletters to every high school graduate year after year after year. Did you know this person came back and is now, I don't know, the principal, or renting a hardware store, or an accountant, or just driving the truck, for heaven's sakes. But he's also coaching the hockey team. So that's on the size of returns, supports to leave. Supports to stay is what we're talking about. Is there a good job here, and are you a valued member? If you're a young person, maybe the town council should have a young person on the council. Every council has 2 people on the council. Maybe that's one way to get young people involved, or a separate council or a subcommittee or whatever. And supports to return, picking up on Diane's point, can you find people that want to move back? I mean, Toronto keeps growing because more immigrants move in. But once they're there, more people move out. Now, if you're in rural Ontario, one good place to attract people are the immigrants in downtown Toronto who in 2 years want to move out, buy a house, set up a family, and so on. I don't know if there's enough immigrants in St. John's that you can say, come on, you folks, you want a smaller place, we can get you a job, Grand Falls, Windsor? I don't know.
Diane?
Yeah, one of the reasons why we're here in Newfoundland is because there was a conference in these very rooms, actually, over the last few days because Barb Neese has this large research project called On the Move. It was called Employment-Related Geographic Mobility. Now it's, I think, On the Move is more catchy title. And there were some sessions that talked about youth mobility. Nicole Power at Memorial is doing some research on youth mobility. And there was some discussion of the kinds of supports that can be put in place in small rural communities. There was also a presentation by Anna Karlsdotter from Norway looking at the same issue, particularly in the northern part of the Scandinavian countries. And they had some community initiatives that provided support for youth who dropped out of school and were very, very discouraged to find themselves as failures. So there are some innovative things going on at the community level. And so I would encourage those who are listening to this now or in the future to check out some of the On the Move presentations and publications, and particularly those that deal with youth, because there is some information out there, but it's spotty information and it doesn't necessarily filter into the literature in the same way that some of these large-scale trends do.
Thanks, Diane. There's another comment online.
Yes, from Hannah.
Good. Thanks, Hannah.
I
Should
believe
have
it's,
just beamed her in for this, really.
yeah. It's in response to Dr. Mulcahy's question on education. She says, Michael Corbett is a great resource on this, as Ray mentioned, but there's also some great work happening in the education field around the idea of place-based education. And I'm sure that Dr. Mulcahy is familiar with that, says Hannah.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
So the numbers up here were saying in every age group except youth, more people moved to Central Census Division, Grand Falls, Windsor, than left. And I surveyed one taxi driver and he didn't believe me. So now I can survey a former resident here. What's happening? What's happening in that part of the country?
I look
Now,
at that and it
the
doesn't...
numbers are very close. More moving in than leaving, but it's just at the break point 0. But it's positive side of 0 as opposed to the negative side of 0.
I honestly found those numbers surprising
Yeah.
because there's a lot of trades is a big part of how the employment sector in Grand Falls, Windsor, or at least it always has. And there's a lot of people that moved away with money to build homes back home, stayed residents, but were just working away. So I don't know. Maybe that plays into it, that they're not actually moving in and out. But I look at those numbers and it's surprising. Like, I can't understand why that is that way.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised, but I don't know Newfoundland well enough to know.
I-
These are based, so where you live and where you're moving is based on where you want your income tax check to be sent. So it's where you're living when you fill out your income tax. And you want your income tax, if you're a student, do you want it to be sent to your mother's house, or do you want it to be sent to your university residence? So that muddies the water a wee bit, but somehow you have to have a rule, and it's based on the income tax address on your income tax.
I've been working a lot with Dr. Alvin Sims on some of these numbers and hearing him speak about this trend across the island in particular of people moving towards the highway. And so when he plots that over time, he can see a real trend. So while Grand Falls Windsor Census Division might be growing, it's because the outlying communities are shrinking. So it's people moving from the coastal communities on either side of those and the smaller outlier communities to a more centralized region that has a better hospital, has better services, and it's closer to the grandkids perhaps in lots of cases, but it's people kind of moving from those smaller communities where the supports are no longer there and the employment isn't necessarily there to some of the larger centers. So it's those service centers across and it literally follows the Trans-Canada Highway across the island. So those service centers in Grand Falls, Windsor, in Gander, Corner Brook, so they're the gathering places for all those other smaller outliners.
Just to add to that, Barb Neese's team on the Move mentioned these hub communities for people who travel back and forth. And most people, I think, in Newfoundland aren't flying internally within Newfoundland because it's too costly. And sometimes it's the bus or sometimes it's traveling on the highway. And Grand Falls is like centered. I think their slogan is perfectly centered, something like that. But yeah, they're right there on the highway. Yeah.
Any other questions from the group here in the room? And we're good online, John? Final comments, Ray?
No, these are excellent questions, and sorry I did not have excellent answers. But you know, it's one of these things that within Newfoundland and Labrador you have to deal with, and having numbers or ideas from elsewhere is helpful, but that's not the solution. It's a local solution, I think.
I think there's lots of thoughts going on and lots of nuggets for us to chew on for future sessions too. So thank you all for coming out. Thank you for watching online. Thanks to Ray. Thanks to the Harris Center team as well. Justin and John and Boyan was in here earlier taking some photos. And anyway, we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know any of this stuff. This is terrible.
You know what? I don't think anybody does.
Yeah.
The thing.
Yeah.